The first drops barely make a sound on the ash. They land, hiss, and vanish, beating on soot-darkened needles and rolling off the blackened skin of a mountainside that burned all summer. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Far below, a highway follows a canyon carved deep into the spine of western mountains. Lights smear across wet pavement. Radios murmur with weather updates, then static. It is November, and the wind carries the breath of the Pacific Inland atmospheric river, band the width of a country, saturated with ocean heat and memory. On maps, the plume glows like a seam of white fire. On the ground, it is simply rain. Relentless. Warm. It pours into the valleys and over the high passes, drumming roofs and helmets, carving tiny rills that unite, darken, and begin to move. In the high country above the road, the soil is not soil as memory knows it. The wildfire took the binding roots, burned away the spongy mat that once caught and held. Heat baked a waxy sheen into the dirt, making it hydrophobic impervious. Water suddenly has nowhere to go but sideways, then downhill, then faster, carrying ash, gravel, then boulders, and the stories of a whole summer's grief. On the radio, low rumble of voices, rainfall exceeding 200 millimeters in the next 48. Keep an eye on the old burn. Copy that. In farmhouses miles away in a valley that used to be a lake, someone checks sandbags against the threshold and breathes out sharply when the forecast image shows the river crest a thin line below their dike. A highway maintenance worker sits in a pickup, windshield wipers beating time. He's done this for years. Storms, slides, nights in the cab, but something about the smell outside isn't right. It's smoke and wet rock all at once, like a campfire drowning. The slope above him is a patchwork of char and exposed roots, a quilt ripped to threads. In the glistening beams of his light, he sees rivulets turning to sheets. On another road, a young couple heads home in a dusty pickup with a cracked windshield. They drove all day to beat the weather, and almost did. She watches the hillside uneasy. He hums with the radio, hands at 10 and 2. They round a bend.
Oh.
The rain lifts briefly, as if the sky breathes in. A cow bellows in the dark miles away, restless in a barn on low ground. The farmer, third generation on a field reclaimed from a vanished lake, runs another hitch of sandbags to a door. The house is warm, the barn warmer, but outside the wind is picking up. Log booms down a ditch and vanishes into the black. In a small office by the tracks, a rail dispatcher watches weather radar wobble and fill with color. Green, then yellow, then red freighted in arcs over the coastal mountains. He's got trains staged back to back to feed a port that never sleeps. He rubs his eyes. There's a text from his daughter about an indigenous fire steward who spoke at school, explaining why some landscapes burn and heal in patterns, why good fire can save you from bad fire. He meant to ask more, but the board is lit top to bottom in amber and blue. A line blinks. Track sensors near a canyon report motion. In a city by a river that slices a mountain in two, an emergency coordinator stands at a window and watches the rain on the pavement outside turn brooding. A texture you can hear. The phone on the desk rings and rings. On the wall, a map. Pins threaded with string. Pump stations. Dikes. Culverts. Bridges. The bones of a region that learned to live with water by keeping it at bay. Up on the burned slopes, the rain hits a frequency that flips a switch. Drops become bullets. Rivulets become chutes. Loose rock unlocks and surges. At first it is a shiver across the surface pattering downhill. A fir stump, roots shaved and raw, pivots and slides, taking a ribbon of soil with it. Then the slope exhales a deeper sound. A seam opens where roots used to knit the world together. A crack, then another. It runs below the moss line where the fire only licked, and into the deep where it raged, hidden and hot for days, cooking the earth. The maintenance worker kills the engine and steps out into a storm that swallows sound. He takes 3 steps to the guardrail and leans over with his flashlight. The beam reveals a trickle-turned torrent below, the creek that should be modest and clear now brown and muscular, phlegmatic with soil. He hears more than feels a thud through his boots. He raises the light. The hillside is moving. A kilometer away, the couple's truck rolls. The road is lined with reflective posts that flash like metronomes. The slope above them shivers, then slumps, heavy as a held breath. The first stones bounce off their hood with metallic clicks. He slows. She says his name, just once. The air fills with the smell of crushed sage and a bitter ash that stings the eyes. A sound starts a groan that does not belong to any machine. It is the mountain waking wrong. In the valley, the farmer hears an alert tone that he's only heard in training. The Nooksack River over the border is rising faster than models guessed. A spillway upstream chokes with logs, and the calculated path of water changes, not by inches, but by a field, then a mile. Texts begin to pop on neighbors' phones. Water at the back fence. My cows are nervous. Anyone have a trailer, please? At the dispatcher's desk, the motion alarm is joined by another. Then another. Slides. Washouts. Audible as clicks. Visible as tiny orange icons. He calls the superintendent. Calls a crew foreman. Watches powerless as the board shifts from amber to red. A single fir, left standing in a moonscape of black cracks. One half trunk falls and catches, then rips free, and when it goes, it brings a carpet with it. Soil, ash, roots, stone, that lurches forward and dissolves into motion, a slow animal that leaps to a sprint. The maintenance worker stumbles backward, scrambling for the truck. Gravel needles his face. He grabs the radio mic and says the word you do not say lightly, slide. The couple's world becomes a screen of brown. The rain vanishes. A low roar is all there is. He turns the wheel out of instinct into nothing. She reaches for his arm. The headlights catch rain again for a second, illumining particle in grief. The earth detaches and moves not like earth, but like water. Their truck lifts, shifts, and it vanishes into a sound so thick it mutes the rain. The slide scours across the road with a force that trains the air to sit still. It drags trees like weeds, boulders like baseballs, chunks of asphalt like skin. The couple's pickup is carried sideways, nose down, windshield spidering. It rocks once, twice, and then settles, skewed in a slurry that keeps moving at the edges, flinging gravel in a slow, furious halo. The roof buckles inward at the passenger side. She coughs, choked by mud and the taste of burned pine. He yells her name and mud steals the sound. Down the canyon, the maintenance worker climbs into his cab, slams the door, and reverses blind. A boulder the size of a dining table leaps the guardrail and lands where his tailgate was, shattering into teeth. The radio blares with overlapping voices. Slide across 99 at KM 49. We're blocked in both directions on 7. Water over the dike at the old Riverside line. Cock is gone. Pete the Coquihalla is gone in places. At the foot of the valley, where a river was once tamed into orderly ditches and a lake was drained a century ago, water returns in its own time. It pours through a break in a dike with a voice like broken glass, racing across fields, swallowing fence posts in minutes. The farmer swings a barn door open, and lights seal the dark in squares. His teenager leads a line of cows by halter, eyes wide, breath steaming in panicked plumes. The calves bawl and press against fencing. The family moves like a well-rehearsed machine, except no rehearsal includes the smell of diesel mixing with rising water or the knowledge that you've got 3 trailers and 200 head. The emergency coordinator stares at a live feed from a pump station, the heart that keeps a valley's blood moving. There's a knock on the door, and then a dozen people are in the room at once. City crews putting on waiters, engineers with clipboards and hollow eyes, a counselor who slept at her desk. We lose Barrowtown, we lose the prairie, someone says. It isn't melodrama. Everyone nods. They know what's at stake. Homes, barns, memories, an entire food system stacked neatly in barns and silos. They know the water does not stop for regret. On the mountain road, headlights cluster in the rain as drivers stop just in time. They sit in their cars and listen to the slope's slow chew. Someone gets out and starts shouting, a sound that breaks the spell and sends others slogging into the dark with headlamps. They move toward a sound that is almost a whisper in the roar. Human voices. The slide cools quickly on the surface, making a crust over liquid earth. The first rescuer steps up and sinks to the thigh. He swears and keeps moving. They triangulate the cries and find the shape of the truck under a gray field. A crowbar appears from nowhere, then another. Hands in pairs and relay begin to dig. Across the border, a river overtops into old pathways that humans forgot and maps remember. Downstream of a wildfire scar, ash turns to ink. A culvert plugs with burned bark, and the water makes a new culvert through someone's living room. A woman climbs onto a table and grabs a framed photograph that she does not want to choose. Between and the table floats out the door, turning gently. On rail lines that had been pinned to cliffs with precision, the ground sighs and lets go. A length of track, elegantly curved, hangs in the air with an engineer's hubris, then drops like rope and vanishes. The dispatcher pinches the bridge of his nose and calls the port. Ships wait at anchor beyond the breakwater, holding containers stacked like toy blocks. Behind them, the Pacific keeps sending freight to the sky while on land freight stands still. On the hillsides, something uncanny happens. In places the fire didn't show itself in summer, it kept working underneath, eating roots, turning duff into a coal seam. The rain makes steam rise from wounds in the slope. And in the faylight of a storm's mid-afternoon, a place looks like hell's own geothermal plant. Firefighters who spent months on these lines look up from their sandbags and see threads of smoke ghosting the edges of the rain. After all that effort to hold flame, now the water threatens to cool what shouldn't have burned and carry what shouldn't have moved. The man in the buried pickup can't feel his legs, can't feel anything but the urge to breathe and the mud that constricts his chest like cable. He turns his head toward the sound of her voice and finds only darkness and the hot copper smell of fear. A knock on metal to his right stuns him. He bangs back with his fist, screaming words that break into steam. There is a chorus of answers and then the ringing of metal on metal as the door's skin is peeled away like rind. In the city, phones jitter with emergency alerts. Merritt's wastewater treatment plant is underwater, the message says. The entire city must evacuate. The word entire carries across kitchens and garages into the cabins of pickups, idling in line, into the hearts of people who were already tired from a summer of smoke and a fall of masks. Radios cut in. Highway 1 is closed. Highway 3 is compromised. Highway 5 is out. The numbers add up to isolation. Fuel stations run out of fuel. The government announces rationing. One more line crosses a collective mind. How does food arrive when the land is broken? On the floodplain, tractors groan to life as farmers form a convoy, drivers standing in water up to their calves to attach chains and gates with shaking fingers. There's a rule about animals in floods that defies law. You do not leave them. A neighbor from 2 roads over shows up with an empty horse trailer. No questions asked. Someone sets up a flashlight on a hay bale and the beam becomes a lighthouse in rain. A calf slips and goes under. A hand, then 2, is there. It surges back, coughing. Above them, the rain hardens as if the storm has decided they deserve no favor. At the pump station, men and women in reflective gear stack sandbags in the wind. The building hums like a living thing. If its heart fails, water will rush backwards, undoing a century of engineering in hours. There is no glamour in this work, only motion. Bag, lift, pass, place. Volunteers' hands are raw and slick. She wipes her face with a sleeve and leaves a streak of gray. The water on the other side rises and presses in, looking for seams. On the mountain road, a pry bar finds purchase and bends, screams, gives. The door yawns. Hands reach into a world that tastes like a coal mine and touch a shoulder, a cheek, the hot slick of life. We got you, someone says, meaning it. Another voice on the other side of the cab is weaker now. They dig like animals and engineers both, careful and feral. The hill above them shifts again, sending down a warning like thunder played backward. Across a half-drowned plain, a line of headlights moves slowly, a snake of evacuation. A dairy cow hauled into a horse trailer, bellows and the sound is human. Teenagers' hands on the halter are white at the knuckles. Their father drives with his jaw set. The border opens not at a country line but between neighbor and neighbor. The flood ignores surveys and names. It arrives everywhere at once. A voice on a handheld crackles. We've lost the span over the cold water. 2 lanes into the river. It's just gone. Somewhere else. Highway 99, slide fatal. Somewhere else. We need bodies at the pump station now. The dispatcher sits alone in the glow of a screen that reflects in his eyes like distant lightning. He can reroute trains, cannot move a mountain back into place. The red icons have outnumbered all the others. He calls his daughter and gets voicemail. He doesn't leave a message. He watches the numbers. Crawl rainfall totals, river heights, pump RPM. He hears a sound in his mind that he will recognize later. a line crossing from stress into failure. On the other side of a sandbag wall, water finds the tiniest opening. A breath between seams and pushes through as a bead, then a trickle, then jets a stream that arcs and slaps the concrete like a whip. Heads turn, someone shouts, bodies move. Pretty language fails in moments like this. There is only the lever of a shovel, the suction of a boot stuck in mud, the dull thud of another bag landing in place. The stream becomes a bruised dark stain, then stalls as if embarrassed, then surges again. The pump station's drone deepens with the head of water. Mechanic leans in and puts his bare palm on the housing, as if he could comfort it. Outside, the river shoulders at the door like a battering ram. On Highway 99, the rain pauses like a breath caught between sobs. The rescuers back away as the slope cracks again. A tongue of debris slumps, then stills. They have two people now, the man and the woman both pulled into the wet air, both coughing hard. Someone's parka goes around her shoulders. She shivers in a way that has less to do with cold than with the body. As revolt against the idea that it almost ended, the man keeps saying one name over and over. A dog they left with a friend in a town, now cut off by water. It is too much to hold, and he holds it anyway. Along the Sumas Prairie, a helicopter thunks low over barns and drowned roseate spotlight, a wand that reveals scenes that will later look impossibly cinematic, but tonight are just desperate. People on roofs waving. A pickup slant parked on a levee with calf pens in the box. Farmer and waiter's chest. Deep guiding cows that swim in two asphalt lanes that used to be a road. The helicopter swings to the pump station, hovers, and then arrows away toward a farmhouse set back from a road that is now a canal. A woman on the roof is holding a laundry basket. Inside the basket is a terrier and a shoebox of photographs. On the chimney, a cat claws against the wind. Up the valley, where the ground is still raw from fire, a gully roars with new meaning and rips open into a chute. It carries not just rock and ash now, but pieces of lives. A length of fence, a picnic table, a barrel of seed. Scientists have a term for this transformation of slope to flow to brief flow. A perfect, sterile phrase that cannot describe the thunder you feel in your chest when one crosses a road. They also have a term for what stitched this into a single disaster: cascading compounding. Heat raises the baseline, fire scours the skin, rain hits a body that can no longer heal in time. These are paper words until the paper itself is carried away in a flood. The rail dispatcher's board is so quiet it is noisy. It normally hum or still a symphony cut in half. Outside the office window, rain moves in windblown sheets across the gravel like ghosts unsure of their purpose. He stares at a single blinking icon near a canyon, the last train caught between two slides, its crew safe, its cargo irrelevant. On another tab, a port camera shows stacks of containers like a city block, patient, unaffected, knowing time will resolve them. He thinks of his daughter again, learning what old new stewardship might have done. He imagines fire laid down intentionally in mosaics, leaving breaks in cover and room. He imagines a mountain with more patience and a river with more room. He looks down at a map created to keep things moving and realizes for the first time how often it asks a prayer. At Barrowtown, publicity has not arrived yet. There is only work and the knowledge that failure would flood lives, not just cartoons on a highway reader board. A woman named only by the luminous stripes on her jacket ties the tail of a sandbag with numb fingers. A soldier in wet fleece jokes badly, and she laughs because that is what you do in the teeth of a thing. The power flickers and everyone looks at the mechanical heart with a mother's fear. The generator hum deepens, a bass note you feel in your teeth. Relief. For now, on the mountain, search and rescue teams arrive in convoys that throw rooster tails of mud. They anchor lines to trucks and trees and splice belay devices with one eye on the slope. Someone reads names out loud of the missing, a list written in yellow pencil that starts to blur with rain. The morning will reveal losses that tonight won't let through. The slide that took the couple took others too, farther up in vehicles unseen. The radios speak in codes learned in calm classrooms. They mean blood and silence. In the valley, cows stand with their heads just above water, bodies buoyant and awkward, eyes wide with the concentration of survival. People wait alongside them, murmuring words that have calmed generations of herds. A rope slings from animal to animal like a lifeline down a body. In a barn, a farmer kneels beside a heifer that won't get up. He has known her since she was the size of a sack of feed. He strokes her wet face and talks to her as if his voice were a hand on her spine. Outside, lights swing and move, and the sound of a pump is the sound of hope. Farther down the river, drift logs the size of buses press against the pilings of a bridge and bump and roll, a mass with intention. Each boom is a warning bell. A tow line stretches from a tug up against the current like a tendon in a flexed arm. The tug's engine howls as if insulted by physics. A local fisherman watches from the shore, knowing the river, even when it's someone else's, and shakes his head. She'll take her own back, he says. An indigenous firekeeper called to high school classrooms during the quiet fall to talk about how landscapes remember, stands at the edge of a parking lot that is now a staging area and watches the rain on the hill. He can see the pattern that isn't visible at the scale of a kitchen table. He can point to where fire stayed at the ground and where it climbed into the crowns, where it killed everything that should have held tonight and where it didn't. He offers to help the crews read the slope, and they nod with a relief that looks like exhaustion. He isn't here to say, "I told you so." He is here to lay hands on a wound and say, "We knew something once. We still do." A text thread lights up among truckers stranded on Highway 7 between slides. They share thermoses and cigarettes and jokes. They take turns napping. A woman in the third rig back has insulin and distributes doses with the practiced ease of someone used to saving strangers. A man in a half-ton plays guitar under the canopy of his tailgate while rain taps time. Siren Dopplers past and the thread is quiet for a moment. Someone posts a photo of their kid in rubber boots jumping into a puddle deep enough to hold a reflection of the sky. This is how you remember why you go through nights like this. By morning, the Pacific has not tired. Another atmospheric river is drawn, fat, on meteorologists' maps. Its tail in the tropics, its head aimed at the same scarred places. The pump station holds. The dike sags in places you can see from space. A drone footage clip that will be on screens far from this valley shows dark water lying like a mirror where roads should be. Livestock crowd runs of gravel left above the flood like islands. A reporter in waders stands in thigh-deep water and speaks in the tight voice of someone forcing calm. Officials warn a second system is approaching, she says. And for some who are already underwater, that sentence is less information than prophecy. On a hill above a highway that now ends in a cliff, the broken road edge frames a river of churning brown as the asphalt looks like torn fabric, the rebar like guts. A worker stands with his hand on his hardette and whispers a word that could be a prayer or a swear. Behind him, excavators sit like dinosaurs at rest. Ahead of him, a province is cleaved, and the world beyond it waits for what it ships each day. Grain, potash, lumber, parts. He thinks about how much of the global depends on a few places holding. The pump station doors shake once under a gust, and then steady. The power flickers again and holds. The woman with raw hands looks up at the high-water mark stain on the wall and adjusts her grip on the next bag. The helicopter returns, drops to a hover, and a sling load full of sand lands like a gift. In the flight path, raindrops whip sideways, and then there is a brief clearing, a circle of less rain that offers a mean joke of sun. People squint up, laugh without humor, and keep moving. The radio flares alive with a new voice. Second system, ETA 12 hours. Barometric pressure falling fast. Hold the line. A crow lands on a street sign half drowned and shakes water from its feathers. The sign says road closed and doesn't say sorry. Somewhere in the middle of the spider web of roads turned rivers, a man scrapes mud off a threshold. Pauses to rub his sternum, as if his heart were something you could soothe, and listens for the distant rush that means the river has reached a new edge. In the mountain, the slide's face settles, dripping, impersonating peace. Far out over the Pacific, the next plume has already left shore. The storm announces itself not with sound but with smell. Salt on the breath of wind, 200 miles from the sea, metallic tang that suggests the sky has something heavy to deliver, birds fly low, pressure falls. Your ears pop as if you've changed elevation without moving an inch. By midday, the horizon is erased, replaced by ridges of water in the streets and sheets draped over the hills. Forecast models use colors that look invented. People on the ground do not need the maps. At the pump station, they've staged everything they can imagine needing. Pallets of sandbags under tarps, plywood cut to fit doorways, portable pumps lined up like backup singers. A whiteboard ticks off tasks in handwriting that reveals fatigue. An engineer with a lopsided grin draws a cartoon of a pump flexing a bicep and writes, "You got this?" It's less a joke than a pact. Outside, the water in the canal foams in a way that means it is strong. Now a river, not a ditch. On the reclaimed lake bed, the flood has found its memory and is hard to disabuse. It explores basements and machine sheds, takes a meandering path across fields that have produced food for cities far downstream and far away. A farmer in hip waders, the same one who led cows like prayer beads, stands on a levee and watches a black bear swim across what was a cornfield 3 days ago. He is too tired to be astonished. Up in the mountain corridor, helicopters move workers and gear into places where roads are gone. They set down on gravel bars and in clearings hacked from salal and alder. Up close, the damage is intimate and obscene. A culvert blasted out like a tooth. A bridge pier gnawed and leaning. A roadbed that simply isn't sheared clean. Crews pace the edge and talk in numbers, span length, bearing capacity, cubic meters. They are translating ruin into plans. Someone makes coffee on a tailgate stove. The sound of rotors and rain fills the pauses. Search and rescue teams among the slides sweep again, gently, for the ones not yet found. A line of red jackets moves across a gray slope like punctuation. They pause in unison at a smell, at a color too different, at the way sticks lie not like sticks, but like wreckage. They are careful with the mountain and careful with the dead. Grief in these places has a texture, granular, fine as the silt that gets into every seam of glove and gear and skin. The rail lines look like necklaces dropped and tangled. Crews fly the damage and trace the necklace with fingers on screens. Each washout is an interruption you can see in the economy tomorrow. Each repair is a promise. Port cranes stand still as metronomes. On board ships at anchor, crews play cards and wait. The dispatcher, finally at home after pulling nights stacked like cordwood, sits in his kitchen and watches the rain bead into curves on the glass. The silence away from the office has its own pitch. He thinks of corn mist in Iowa, or potash in Saskatchewan, or lumber stamped in mills that smell like sap and sweat, waiting. He knows what will happen when the lines are rethreaded, a surge so intense it will feel like flood in reverse. On the prairie, a wall of sandbags that looked absurd 3 days ago looks exactly tall enough. Water slaps at it and drops back spitting. Volunteers and borrowed hip waders stagger. The mud sucks. A box of donuts sits open under a tarp, sugar dissolved to crust. Someone pours coffee into a paper cup and hands it to the indigenous firekeeper, who has been everywhere at once these last days, reading the slope, walking the dike line, teaching anyone who will listen the way landscapes respond to the touch of fire and water. He points to the fields beyond the dike and tells the farmer about a time when the lake was allowed to breathe and flood and exhale in drought, how villages and harvests were planned for that rhythm, not against it. The farmer nods, not ready to hear it all, ready to hear some. By afternoon, the second storm's belly is over the mountains. It's a marvel of physics with no regard for human plans. Moist air rises, cools, condenses, rains, repeats an engine that has learned this route. On the burned slopes, raindrops strike ash and roll uninvited into streams that are already angry. The chutes that opened 3 days ago reopen with new appetite. Where trees once caught rockfall with their bodies, nothing stands. Debris fans that had just begun to dry pulse again, like a wound reopened. In a neighborhood at the city's edge, the creek that is normally beautiful crosses the path and knocks down a fence with the mood of a drunk. A kid in a yellow rain jacket stares at the water with the awe that comes from seeing power. His mother pulls him back. Man 2 doors down plucks a cedar plank out of the flow of his own fence, a piece of his own yard, and leans it against a mailbox. He'll nail it back up when he can. This is the country's resilience myth in miniature. Rebuild at the edge, as if the edge is fixed. At the pump station, the first thing goes wrong. Power flicker longer than flicker. A monitor goes dark. It's the generator already warm. Coughs once in a way everyone hears over the rain. A mechanic runs a hand along cables and listens with the care of a doctor listening to a child's chest. The lights blink back. The hum steadies. A cheer goes up that has fear in it. Outside, someone points. There. Water snakes in a sheet, toward a joint at the building's corner. It looks like an insignificant thing, an inch of wet against concrete. Everyone knows it is not insignificant. A truck-mounted pump is rolled off a flatbed and slung into place like a weapon. Hoses snap onto couplings with a satisfaction that travels up the arm. The engine sputters, then catches, the sound both agricultural and heroic. Jetting arcs of brown-white water back into the channel is the kind of victory that can be celebrated on no budget. For free, with hands. On the highway embankment, a foreman stares at a span that isn't there and says to a younger worker, "We'll throw a Bailey across it if we have to." The kid says, "What's a Bailey?" The foreman realizes that knowledge skipped a generation somewhere, not because the young are at fault, but because the problem is bigger than the old. He describes a modular bridge that soldiers learned to build in a hurry a lifetime ago. He thinks of how often the road owes its life to war's engineering. He thinks of how hard it is to get a permit to do anything permanent here. He thinks also of fish, and how they need to move under this road when there is water and when there is less. It is possible to hold all these thoughts without losing the thread, if the thread is survival. Evening drops like a stone. Headlamps create their own world. Beyond their circle, the storm has its way. A text goes out, another emergency alert. Evacuation order extended. Rainfall intensifying overnight. Shelter location updated. The farmer's daughter reads it and looks at her mother. "We can't go," she says, and it isn't teenage defiance. It is inventory. Animals, pumps, a house that has not been surrendered to water. You do not go. At the fallen highway, a search leader kneels, hand on a dog's harness. The dog pulls, pauses, circles. Rain drips off his ears. He leans into the work like a poet to a line. He stops, stiffens, sits. The handler's breath fogs and stops. Flags go down. The team gathers with a kindness that is almost a touch. The radio clears its throat and then is gentle too. Somewhere else, sirens wail. The sound is now background. On the port camera feed, lightning spiderwebs beyond the breakwater, silent from this distance, too bright to be angelic. On the hill, a transformer hums and then snaps with a light that makes the hair on the arm stand up. The pump station's hum falters again, recovers. Volunteer shakes out her hands, flexes her fingers, and gets back in line. The whiteboard in the control room has a single line added at the bottom in different handwriting. Don't stop. The night puts on more weight than a single night should carry. In it are cows lowing and the pump droning and a distant thud of a slide and the flat cry of a coyote cut off suddenly. The sky presses low, the worst moment, as if feeling the drama. The river out front reaches its highest and pushes its shoulder into the dike, as a friend into a door. The top row of sandbags shifts. Ash! Water dribbles through, cold as moral certainty. There is a second that feels longer than seconds can be, when everyone looks at the wall at each other. At the line on the whiteboard that says "Don't stop," and the story hangs on whether hands can move as fast as the water does. In that hanging second, a generator coughs, another truck backs into place, a fist clenches around a twine tie. The sky cracks itself open again, and the wall holds. Not by much, and not because physics favored it, but because hands did. The new bags knit with the old. The cold bead becomes a sheen, then nothing. Standby pumps pick up a few more heartbeats. The hum deepens and stays. The cheer this time is not loud. It is a sound exhaled from the gut, private and public at once. Some people cry and cover their faces without embarrassment. Some lean forehead to forearm and let the rain hide it. For a minute, the only honest thing anyone can do is stand still. By morning, the second river has given what it came to give. It drains back across the maps, leaves behind brown lines on white walls, silt in corners of rooms, and in the creases of hands. Helicopters arc less often now. The farmer walks a road that was underwater, and your boots leave prints in powder made of crushed stone and clay. In the barn, losses total themselves, lives that did not make it. The numbers are grim in ways that don't translate well to the evening news. Hundreds of thousands of poultry, hundreds of hogs, cattle counted by hands that knew them. Man leans against a post and does not move for a while. Then he moves. On the mountain corridor, quiet is something you hear in your bones. The slide faces glisten clean and wet, paused but not corrected. Crosses or ribbons appear on guardrails where the worst loss is settled. 5 names from Highway 99 become more than numbers, and families speak about them in voices that have no room for cameras. Rescue is over here. Recovery begins. Engineers spread out and do what they must do. Measure, draw, plan. The phrase "build back" is said in a dozen meetings, and in some of those meetings people challenge the last word. Back to what? The rail dispatcher walks into a yard that smells of creosote and rain and grease. The first train creeps over a repaired section at a speed that would bore a child. The brakeman rides the head end, watching the track like a hawk, ready to wave it down with his arm like it's the 1940s, when it passes and nothing breaks. A yard cheer rises only a little, because everyone has learned how thin the line can be between held and lost. Containers begin to move toward cranes again. Ships turn their bows shoreward. The dispatcher texts his daughter, "You were right about the land having a memory." She texts back a photo of a school project, a map of the valley with the old lake drawn blue again. At Barrowtown, there are photographs taken that will be put up in halls and on fridge doors. They show people with mud-torn hands and faces striped with rain, smiling like they got away with something the world was sure they could not. There is talk of awards and commendations. Behind the attention, quiet arguments begin about zoning and levees, about whether to reflood what was once a lake to protect what surrounds it, about buying out homes that will flood again, one way or another. The arguments are not petty. They're about memory and money and the shape of the next generation's nights. Scientists go to work like detectives. Radar satellites that saw through the storm, my NSA, are reveal where the Earth slipped and how far. Models show slopes where fire removed the very lace that held them together, and where hydrophobic soils turned rain into marbles rolling downhill. Hydrologists thumb through rain totals 200 to 300 millimeters across the places where the mountains squeeze the sky and point to the way the river rose faster than older records expected, because older records didn't include a summer like this. Heat like a salve that turned to a brand. The town of Lytton set ablaze by a temperature you did not think you'd see here, 49.6 degrees Celsius, a national record. That heat ringed the hills in black and set up a November that would be argued about in climate attribution papers and kitchen tables alike. In the stories that follow, the word compound starts appearing more. Compound disaster is a technical phrase that feels too elegant for what it describes. Flood beating on a door kicked in by fire, landslide riding a slope stripped of roots. Experts pull lines from different sciences into a single braid. Jet stream patterns that stall storms. Warm air that can hold and deliver more water. Monsoons shifting. Snow lines creeping. Even skeptics learn new vocabulary. The phrase, 1 in 100-year event, is taken out back and gently retired. People start asking the better question, what are we building to now? There are global ripples you can measure. For a week and more, the port of Vancouver, Canada's busiest, sits on pause. And with it, a slice of the world's traffic in grain, potash, lumber, goods that feed and build places far from these mountains. Supermarket shelves in island towns in this province show gaps. Gas stations ration, factory in a prairie city bundles shipments differently to wait for the rails. A farmer in Asia sees a price spike in feed and never knows why the graph had that funny dent in November. Layered on a global map, lines of interdependence glow like arteries. A blow in one place makes another place dizzy. On the prairie, the farmer and the firekeeper walk a line together that isn't visible yet, the place where a new levee might go, or where an old meander might be remade into a wetland that takes the first punching. They don't agree on everything. They agree on enough that mosaic burns in the uplands could check the next fire season's fervor. Culverts should be big enough to carry fish and flood. That permission to do the right thing shouldn't take longer than it takes a storm to cross the ocean. They talk about beavers, the original hydrologists, and whether to hire them as contractors. They laugh not because it's funny, but because imagining a future together is a different sort of defense. At a memorial near the slide, boots stand in the mud while names are said. A search dog presses his head into his handler's leg. A young woman who was pulled from a cab with mud in her teeth reads a note she wrote in the hospital about the strangers who dug her out. Her voice shakes and then steadies. The rain that falls during the ceremony is light, a reminder, not a threat. The mountain stands, scarred and honest. In a room full of planners, someone puts up a slide of a future map. wider floodways, stronger dikes in the right places. Roads on pilings over portions that will be wet again. Rail lines moved off the most precarious slopes. A port diversified. Another slide shows prescribed fire maps. The kind of patchwork that turns a crown fire into a surface fire into something you can walk behind and hold. There is talk of insurance not as absolution but as compass, of retreat not as surrender but as strategy. There is talk of infrastructure built with yields and fish and farms and storms, all in the same equation. There is talk of listening more and not just to engineers. And there are neighbors. Someone opens a field to store trailers of cows. Someone washes mud-caked hands and bakes bread for crews that don't go off shift. The dispatcher's daughter posts a video of sandbagging techniques that goes modestly viral. The farmer's son, who wasn't sure if he would stay on the land, drives a load of hay to a place that carried their calves through the worst hour. He decides to stay, for now. The firekeeper lights a small test burn come spring, on a hillside at the edge of town, under the eyes of elders and biologists, and the smoke rises like a promise, low, blue, and useful. The season turns. Snow quiets the black on the slopes. The river, returned to its banks, looks innocent, a child asleep after a tantrum. Pump stations hum without audience. Bridges wear the newness of scars. In kitchens and council chambers, in barns and boardrooms, the question turns from, how do we get back, to how do we go on? The answer is not one answer. It is hands on sandbags. It is laws that change. It is maps redrawn. It is fire used right. It is finally admitting that water goes where water has always gone, and making room for that truth. We once believed disasters happened one at a time, in clean chapters. This week taught otherwise, that in a warming world, hazards pile on hazards. Not politely, but all at once. Flood, landslide, wildfire. A single storm striking a landscape prewritten by a season of heat. The story is not just of loss. It is of a language we are learning to speak at last, together with the land, and not only over it. If stories like this move you, subscribe for more true events that change the world.